Hey, friends, welcome to episode 548 of the My1236 podcast. I am Kevin Hunsberger, joined this week by Chad Smart, and we are going to answer an age-old question. Why do you watch professional wrestling or sports entertainment? Or I guess, Chad, we haven't talked in a couple of weeks, at least here on the podcast. What are your thoughts? We'll start off with this. What are your thoughts on the new freestyle, all-American freestyle wrestling that Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan and Izzy somebody, I apologize.
Is he dead?
No.
The JCW champion? Oh.
That are working to put together. It's my understanding it's going to be amateur style wrestling, but with a little sports entertainment flair, for lack of a better word. What's your initial impression and thoughts? And what did you think? Because I don't think we talked at all when the original promos came out, because a lot of people, I think, thought maybe Vince McMahon was getting back into the game.
You ever watched amateur freestyle wrestling? For more than 30 seconds?
I think I made it about 42 seconds once.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess as we get into this conversation, it will explain why we watch professional wrestling and not amateur.
Yeah.
It's kind of like why I watch wrestling and not UFC. Nothing against the the talent is there in the freestyle and UFC, but it's not entertaining because it's just not. I think you need the story-driven element to make it interesting. I mean, you can compare it to other sports like basketball, baseball. I'm going to name sports now because I'm sure you don't know what sports are. But you look at these other games and you can see a storyline that happens organically and, in there. And that helps keep the interest up. Whereas, these freestyle wrestling and UFC where a match can be over with in, 5 seconds or can go the full round, but you never know. There's no build. There's no. I guess if you're writing, if you're doing story writing, you have your hook, your rising action, your climax. Wrestling storylines are the same, whereas freestyle wrestling, it's kind of boring. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Is there's no excitement in it.
I kind of am envisioning, and I don't know if this will be the case, but almost throwback to when WBF was on. You took the sport of, you took the competition of bodybuilding, and they gave them these characters and tried to make it more like sports entertainment or like pro wrestling in the early 90s. And it just didn't, I don't think it resonated. And I feel like they're going to try to kind of do something along those lines with this to give these wrestlers, these athletes, some personality and something to kind of get behind. And I'm not saying that they're going to come out dressed like garbage men or roosters or prison guards, but I feel like they're going to try to do a little injection of personality. But again, I feel like we've got that with pro wrestling and with sports entertainment, and between literally any night of the week, pick it, you can turn on whether it's cable or a streaming service, and you're going to find, whether it's AEW or WWE or NXT or TNA or MLW or ROH or New Japan or whatever the case may be, wrestling is everywhere. I don't know.
No.
I'm kind of with you. I'm a cynic on this one and not 100% sure where exactly this is going to end up falling.
Well, and when you think amateur wrestling, do you think Hulk Hogan?
Right.
Do you think Eric Bischoff?
I think of Benjamin Shelton sometimes.
Yeah, Benjamin Shelton and Lesnar Brock would be the more in line, where I think they would add more credibility to the product just because of their background.
Yeah.
But when I see Hogan and Bischoff together, it's just very carny, I guess. I don't have high hopes for it to be anything other than the fact that Hogan will probably be the champion within 6 months.
I don't know that we've ever talked about it, and we may tiptoe onto things that we end up not sharing, but Hulk Hogan for so long, for so many years, was revered as one of the all-time greats, and he's on everybody's Mount Rushmore. And obviously, through the years, I think part of his public persona has been tarnished, whether it's the recordings, the sex tape, his politics, whatever you want to throw out there. But we know other wrestlers' politics, and this kind of goes back to the whole Netflix thing and why he got booed. And then I think for me, because I was a tried and true Hulkamaniac in those early days of 84 to 90-ish, I was cheering for and rooting for Hulk Hogan. And then, as we get older, we change our perception and whatever. I think now when I hear him talk and do these interviews and stuff, and I get it, it's pro wrestling, it's part of the gig, but I think when a lot of fans sit down and listen to these interviews, they expect at least a kernel of truth, or and it feels like he just says things that are so like, and maybe it's from, and I'm not trying to be funny or flippant or anything along those lines, but maybe it's part of the damage that has come with being a pro wrestler. His memory or his cognitive abilities has changed, and he says things that maybe he thinks are true, or maybe he is just outright lying. I don't know. But what do you think it is that tarnished Hulk Hogan's legacy? Because there's that old saying of, you can die the hero or live to be found out to be the villain, or however that goes. And I see that picture pop up with the Ultimate Warrior and Roddy Piper, and I think maybe Dusty Rhodes, and then Hulk Hogan. And Hogan, or might be Macho Man, not Dusty.
Macho Man, yeah.
Hogan is the one who is still around, and these other icons that died way too soon. What do you think it is? I mean, is it Hogan specifically, or is it just a case of because I hate to say it with Ric Flair, even his legacy from when we were kids watching him has tarnished, obviously, too.
Yeah. I find it interesting that they include Ultimate Warrior in that meme, because if you go back, a few years before he died, I don't think he was really on the top list of anybody's, for Hogan. Yeah, I think, I would say probably the short answer, which affects a lot of things in society right now, social media. If we didn't have social media, if we didn't have everybody, when we were growing up, the people whose opinion you got was your close friends. And so, but now you have thousands of people whose opinions you get. And unfortunately, there's a lot of groupthink when it comes to social media. So, not saying that they're wrong, but it's easier to go with the flow of like, oh, okay, now we're going to hate this person, or we're going to cheer this person. But I also think, as someone who only cheered Hulk Hogan up through WrestleMania 1, because I hated Roddy Piper because I was a stupid kid and didn't realize that was what I was supposed to be doing. So I've never been a Hulkamaniac. That picture from Raw 2007 withstanding.
That's true.
I think his biggest thing is that, the fact that he says stuff that is so patently false. And I don't know if that comes from wrestling. I'm trying to be the Hulk Hogan character and just trying to be this larger than life persona. And maybe he doesn't know where Terry Bollea ends and Hulk Hogan starts. And, does anybody really believe that Metallica wanted him to come play bass after they fired Jason? It's just those type of things. Or, and when it comes to wrestling stories, everybody exaggerates. And that's WWE has been exaggerating since the Hogan days.
Sure.
So I think part of it could be that, is just where it is. And I think then the social media aspect too comes into these private phone calls, the sex tape, stuff that we're not supposed to see, hear, know about, which doesn't make it right. But you and I have said, I think 99% of the population, if text messages or private conversation got released, like everybody would be canceled.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But for some reason, we also take a moral high ground when that happens. Mm-hmm. So we try to think, we're better, or we have to. I think like this last week or so when they were talking about the wrestling, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm good friends with Benjamin Shelton," which again is that just a slip of the tongue, which then becomes exaggerated into a bigger thing, or is it Hogan trying to, show how into the amateur wrestling he is without actually being there?
Yeah.
And then, and this will be maybe a medium hot take, for his private conversations, the language that he was using, this is my own sense, is that I'm not condoning what he said, the language that he used, but it is very prevalent in society. And I think, it's either, I am all for it, an all or none situation. I'm not for like, oh, this word is okay in this setting, but not okay over here. And I think Hogan, especially since he was hanging out with, Nash, who was very big into the hip hop scene during the NWO days, maybe it wore, influenced him. I don't know. But yeah, I just think Hogan, the fact that he keeps opening his mouth ruins his own legacy, because he can't not be Hulk Hogan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of become the trend with, in 2025, we're seeing, obviously Vince McMahon, and not without his controversy, not without everything that's going on around him. There's still people that think that he's going to be back in some form or fashion.
In Pog form, hopefully.
I'm not holding my breath for a Vince McMahon return. But,
yeah.
He'll be 80 later this year, and I realize his mother lived to be over 100, but I just think that he probably lived a much different life than what his mom lived. So
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But we've dropped some names of some big superstars: Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan, probably Roddy Piper, Ric Flair.
And real quick, so let's go with Piper. Again, Piper died way too soon.
Mm-hmm.
And Piper, again, had that Piper persona.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when he was out of the wrestling ring, that persona was more, I don't want to shoot, brother, but it was more Roderick Toombs than Roddy Piper. Like he knew when to be Piper and when to be the average person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I also, having, like I said, I had the privilege of meeting him and just seeing how down to earth he was and how personable he was with the fans. Whereas I think Hogan still kind of, I've met Hogan too, and he was very nice, but it was a different, like, one was in a wrestling scenario, one was in a non-wrestling scenario, and it's just different. But I think, and I obviously never met Warrior or Savage, so I don't know what they were like personally, but I think, again, it comes down to respecting fans versus playing up a persona.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, those big names were the top stars when we were kids, when we were growing up, when we were starting to watch wrestling, these larger than life characters. And we said, kind of, why do we watch wrestling? And I think the easy answer when we were kids is because those bigger, larger than life characters captured our attention. I've told the story 1,000 times that, for me, it was Kerry Von Erich versus Ric Flair in the steel cage, Christmas 1982. That was like my first memory of seeing it and becoming hooked. I had seen it before. My brother, my dad, my uncle had it on. They would go to the matches in St. Louis when and I would avoid going because I wasn't into it. But it was after that moment in '82 that kind of hooked me. And then I started buying magazines, and then eventually the action figures come out, and then the cartoons and the lunch boxes and the whole nine yards. And so, really, it became more of a child focused product, I think, from the WWF side of things. And then eventually some of the other companies followed suit and did the toys and the games and all that kind of stuff. So, and I don't know, Chad, if you had friends when you were a kid, you talked about
Nope.
friends being your friends that watched wrestling. And then let me finish my sentence. I had a group that we'd watch and we'd talk about it in junior high and in high school, but really it kind of became very distant. And then as we got older, it all kind of fell off until the Attitude Era. And then some of my friends that were when I was a little kid started watching again, and then we would communicate, usually via social or not even social media back then, but just email or text or whatever, and say, did you see this? Did you see that? So it kind of evolved, and now those fans are gone again, I think, and really for the past 40 plus years, 42, 43, 44 years, whatever it's been, I still watch, and I watch Raw, and I watch the highlights on social media all the time, and the pay-per-view or the PLEs. So I guess what I'm getting at for you is what kept you around? Why do you continue to watch? What attracted you in the '80s, and then you have been pretty much with it since then. I don't think you've had a lapsed period either, where some fans kind of dip out and then get back into it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lapse there, but not as significant as like totally not watching. It just when I was in college and didn't have cable, I couldn't keep up. But I would when I would go home,
Yeah.
I would watch.
Mm.
And yeah, we've talked about it. I don't know exactly when I started watching wrestling. I know it was before WrestleMania 1, and I know that it was mostly JCW on TBS and Wrestling at the Chase.
JCP.
JCP, yeah, not JCW. That's Juggalos down with the clowns. And I remember like my cousin talking about wrestling, specifically Wrestling at the Chase, because that would be like we would go home from church on Sunday and catch the last half hour of that. Yeah. But that was like he would talk about Bulldog Bob Brown and Superfly Snuka, and I'm like, these names are stupid. Like, why are you watching this? But then I got hooked. I started watching WCCW, Mid South, and looking at WCCW and Mid South, it's not like you had the flamboyancy of what WWF was. It was more of the stripped down, no frills, just wrestling aspect. The sports entertainment wasn't there, and from Bill Watts and Von Erich.
I would disagree on that to an extent. It wasn't over the top like Vince, right? But I mean, we got Kamala and Missing Link and those larger than life characters. I think kind of introduced, and then obviously they all end up in
front. But, yeah. I guess maybe not the full pageant.
The production value obviously wasn't there for sure. Yeah. And I think Vince did take a bigger leap of faith in putting it out there and his approach to it. And then, of course, the marketing and the push behind it. Because we've talked about it before. Imagine if JCP had done action figures. I mean, the Rock and Roll Express was probably the most over act in wrestling at one point. Kerry Von Erich and the Von Erich brothers, even though they were big in Texas, they were big worldwide. But they didn't have that machine behind them. So I often wonder if the machine had been in several promotions, I think Vince would have had a hell of a lot harder time kind of conquering the world like he did. I mean, he just basically cherry picked and did what he wanted to do. And, you could argue whether it was ethical or not on, at some point, but I mean, he had the secret
Yeah,
sauce, if you will, that took him to superstar.
yeah, and I mean, there's a whole nother topic there of just and not to get. I'll try to stay out of the weeds too much on this, but it's like, it's a thing of the worst words you can hear are, "This is the way we've always done it."
Right.
So this way we're
Sure.
going to keep doing it. And that was, although, Bill Watts had a successful territory. Fritz had the successful, all these guys had successful territories to where they could have probably been bigger than they were had they wanted to. But, and again, maybe it is that code of ethics because they were ex wrestlers, where Vince was coming in, and didn't really have the, I don't know if he had the friendship that he didn't, that he was okay with stabbing people in the back. But again, you have to have that vision, or we're not sitting here right now talking about wrestling.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go
Well,
on.
I was just gonna finish my thing where I don't know why I bought into wrestling so hard. And I know as I got older, like I said, once I started going off to college, not watching as much, but then ECW came along, and that's what pulled me back into it. Because I guess kind of like Todd Gordon, who founded ECW, like WWE had gotten too cartoony, and ECW was, now we look back and say, yeah, probably not the best, with all the chair shots and tables, and probably not the best health place for, healthy wrestlers, but it was that more realistic aspect and the more adult type promotion. So that got, and then the NWO, and then the whole Attitude Era just kind of kept me. But then by that time, I think the internet was around, and so the behind the scenes aspect is one of the bigger issues that kept, because when the wrestling isn't, when the on-screen product isn't that great, the behind the scenes is usually better, and so you just keep following it that way.
So do you think it's fair to say, so we're in the, we're golden era generation, if you will, when we first start watching. So
yeah,
it's Hogan and Warrior and Savage and Piper and Flair and the Horsemen, and and I'm going to get
Coco Beware and
yeah,
Red Rooster, and let's give people their flowers.
I'll get into the two different companies here in a second, but do you think it's fair to say, because from basically 80, let's say 84, the birth of Hulkamania up until 91, 92, it was that big wave that everybody was kind of riding on. And I know JCP had gone through changes and became WCW. But again, both companies were kind of on that cartoonish, or still catering to that Saturday morning crowd of kids and cereals and action figures and whatnot. And then we hit that lull. I feel like 92, probably the second half of 92 through probably about 95, both companies, WWE and WCW, were kind of in the shitter. But it was that innovation of ECW, and I think that this sometimes gets lost on fans because I think they look at it as that little crappy promotion in a bingo hall. But I think without its influence, I don't think we get the Attitude Era and storylines with the end of I feel like Paul Heyman and ECW influenced the genre in a way. And we talked, or last week, I talked about Sabu a bit, and I didn't probably give him all the flowers he deserved, but I feel like without those guys kind of leading the way, and you mentioned it earlier, in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best, but it really is what started a whole new revolution, I think, for pro wrestling.
Yeah, and I think obviously without ECW, I don't think we have the luchadors. We don't have the cruiserweight division that WCW stole and marketed better, because they had the bigger machine behind them. But I think, as we talked about, you and I got into wrestling 10, 11 years old. So let's say average fan coming up through the Hogan years is probably 6 to 12. By the time 95, 96 rolls around, they're now in college or, just in that time frame. It's like music, you have like a 5-year period where one genre will be really big, and then that audience kind of ages out, and the since we're talking wrestling, the new generation comes along, and I think that's why ECW succeeded, was because they were giving a product that was more geared towards those fans that had now aged out of the WWE product, and especially their use of mainstream music, to tie in to get people into it. And yeah, I think had it not been for ECW, I don't think WWE. I mean, WCW wouldn't have had the talent that they had because they were raiding ECW. And WWE wouldn't have had the attitude that came along. I think we would have, the Goon probably would have lasted longer, or TL Hopper, and we've said it before, WWE had the luck of misfortunes coming back to be better than what was presented. Had the Click not done the curtain call at Madison Square Garden, Triple H wins King of the Ring that year. Steve Austin does not.
Yeah.
And I was just reading an interview with Mark Marrow the other day, where at King of the Ring 96, he fought Austin, busted Austin's lip. So Austin had to go to the hospital and get stitches before he came back. When he came to kill time, I guess Jake Roberts did the promo, and he was doing the Born Again, Christian storyline. If he doesn't cut that promo, Austin doesn't have the response of Austin 316.
Yeah.
So if all that doesn't happen, where are we with wrestling today?
Right. Yeah.
And again, that's where you can't plan for those things, which is, one of my biggest complaints with the last 10 years is they tried to make Roman Reigns that guy, and they finally got around to it. But would someone else be bigger had they not stuck to their guns and just tried to do something more organic?
Yeah. I was at a work conference last month, and
you said, acknowledge me.
What's that?
And you said, acknowledge me.
Yeah. One of the sessions I sat in on was like, I work at a college, so they were focusing on like enrollment, and their original approach was, why are students leaving? They would have like a dip. If they had 100 students, 8 of them would leave. They had a 92% retention rate basically, and they got hung up on that 8% that wasn't sticking around, instead of figuring out why the 92% were staying. And so they've kind of redone their approach, and now they're focusing on the positive of like, why did you stay? Why are you staying here? And using that then as part of their recruitment and strategy. So I'm getting to that point to say, I do think that you and I are probably in a rare league as far as our fandom, of the probably 10 or 20 people that I knew at school that watched. I could probably count on one hand how many are still watching on a regular basis, and probably even fewer that are like, I don't know if I still put myself in the diehard category, but I mean, I do a wrestling podcast every week. I watch the stuff every week. Now, did I drop everything? 10 years ago, I probably would have dropped everything and gone to see Backlash in St. Louis. It's a 2-hour trip from here. I didn't do that this year. I don't think that
didn't get to the bank to take out the loan to buy the ticket. So
I don't think that takes away from my fandom at all. Because as we get older and become adults and have different responsibilities and things, we can't always do that. And I've had the unique opportunity as well to work within a couple of different independent wrestling companies, which I thought would never happen either. So I feel like that has kind of also kept me connected with my fandom of opening up my eyes to different aspects, because there was a time there where I was WWE, WCW, ECW. Those were the ones that I watched, and I didn't branch out of anything that wasn't on TV. And meeting you as well introduced me to TNA at the time, those Wednesday pay-per-views, Ring of Honor. You brought me to All American Pro Wrestling here in Southern Illinois, and then a couple of other, the night we went and saw Bob Orton wrestle at Muggsy McGuire's in front of probably 25 people, so you opened my eyes to a whole new world of wrestling as well. So yeah, I do think that I'm still just as into it now. And if you were here today and there was an indie show in town, we'd go and watch it. So what kept us around, I guess, is, because again, there's probably any given month here in Southern Illinois, probably 3 or 4 weekends where you could go watch indie wrestling within a 45-mile radius of where I live. I don't, because again, I have other things going on and I haven't prioritized that. And when you're in it, you're more apt to be a part of it and go and watch. But, I know you did the pro wrestling when they were coming into town and stuff, but what compels you today to buy a ticket or to plunk down $50 to watch a pay-per-view and continue to watch wrestling?
That's a good question. And I think because, during the early 2000s, once WCW and ECW, were no more, I think thankfully then TNA, Ring of Honor, and especially Chikara came up, and Ring of Honor and Chikara, I was having to buy DVDs and wait 2-3 months after a show happened to watch it. But with social media, you already knew what had happened, But I was into it, where I was buying not Ring of Honor so much, but all the Chikara shows. I would watch and try to get you to watch, and you'd be like, "This is stupid. Why are there ants wrestling in the ring?" But right now, as we record this, in I think it's 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks, 5 miles down the road from me is the NXT AAA Worlds Collide venue, and then across the street from that, right after, is Money in the Bank. Am I going to those shows? No, because part of it is, like you said, there's other responsibilities that I have now, and there's also the monetary factor of I don't feel like it is worth the money to go to those shows. This coming weekend, as we record this, is the next AEW pay-per-view. I will spend the $50 on that because
you're a mark.
I am a mark. I'm an AEW mark. I will freely admit it because, and I think this is where I'm going to go off side tangent of the wrestling tribalism that actually, I think harms fans in the industry more so. I mean, I watched Backlash last week. It was fine. Had I paid $50 for it, I probably would not be paying $50 for King of the Ring next month. But as part of my Peacock subscription, sure, I'll watch Money in the Bank. But with AEW, I feel like I get my money's worth because, it's like, I guess, if someone who's really into a Marvel movie versus John Wick, I don't know if those are very comparable to the wrestling industry, but, it's what you prefer. Again, you can get entertainment out of both, but do you prefer one over the other? And for me right now, it's AEW. And I think WWE just doesn't offer the product that again, nothing against the talent. I think the talent's there. It's oddly going back to what we were saying earlier about all the other indie promotions or the territories, is the production of WWE just doesn't appeal to me as it did when I was younger. And I get that out of AEW. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, "Oh, WWE sucks and you're terrible if you watch it," or I'm like, no, just, again, I think that comes with age though, where you're like, it's wrestling. It doesn't matter. Like,
right.
Enjoy what you watch.
Does AEW not stream on HBO?
They stream on Max, not the pay-per-views yet. That's
allegedly
coming.
So they'd still do a traditional pay-per-view model.
Yeah.
Where you have to buy it. Okay.
Yeah. And they stream on Max, but unfortunately they don't stream. They stream live, but then they don't put the show up for replay until a week after, which why that is, I don't know. And I really wish they would stop so that I could cut Sling off my monthly bills and just have Max. But I don't want to wait a week to watch a show, especially if there's a pay-per-view coming up. You want to see what leads into it.
So explain this to folks that are listening and watching.
Yeah.
You only have Sling so you can watch AEW.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, why? And I'm not asking that to be, but seriously, I watch all of those clips and stuff on social media, and I feel like I'm not missing anything by doing that. Do you do that, or do you just watch and you're like, I'm just gonna bite the bullet on this and do it?
I don't watch highlights online. I just never have. And Sling, I mean, I guess there are some other live sports that I can watch on there. And also because my girlfriend's a huge Big Bang Theory fan, and TBS airs like 28 hours of Big Bang Theory when they're not airing AEW, which we also have Max, which you can watch them there too without commercials, but it's just, I guess, easier to constantly watch season 8 as it appears to be the only one that streams during the hours that we're watching. But yeah, I have Sling mainly just for AEW, and I think that's my sickness of I have to watch it, even though I don't always watch it live. I record, it records, and then I watch it at night, because I feel like if I'm watching highlights, I don't. And again, having not doing so, I don't know if this is correct or not. But I feel like I'm missing little things, and so I just prefer to watch the entire series. But it's interesting, kind of jumping back. I talked about ordering DVDs of Ring of Honor and Chikara. That was a time when you had to make an effort to watch indie wrestling. Mm-hmm. There is now IWTV, which is a monthly subscription that has, I don't know how many indie promotions. There's Fight TV Plus, which has GCW and other promotions that you could watch. Again, monthly fee, you watch this all live. Do I do those? No, I don't watch indie wrestling the way that I used to. And I've talked about it. Is that just because getting older, again, priority shifting, I actually have a life now to where I do things at night besides sit at home and watch wrestling? Or is it also that, and again, I don't want to slight anybody or anything, but the indie scene right now to me is not as invigorating, is that the right word, as it was 20 years ago. I don't know who's going to show up on WWE or AEW that I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this guy's finally here. Like I did, with Kevin Steen, Sami Zayn, Claudio. I know Chris Hero never made it, but Fire Ant and these people, I don't know. But
do you put AEW in the indie category or not?
No. I mean, they're all, I would say, even WWE, well, maybe not now that they're owned by a conglomerate, but I would think, when the McMahons owned it, you could consider that an indie because it was just a family promotion that just had a good TV deal. But I think indie, I would say anything that draws less, that averages around 100 people, or, maybe a little bit more if you have a major indie. But anybody
those guys get to go and wrestle other places, right?
Yeah.
Yes. AEW guys do?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I think they have to clear everything through.
Yeah, they're not going to go wrestle in WWE, obviously, but.
Right. But they have to make sure that they're not needed by AEW for that weekend. But
do you see a day where AEW and WWE do a joint venture?
Did we ever see a day when WWE and TNA would do a joint venture? You never say never in the wrestling world. I I don't think it's necessary, but I could see it happening. And I could, unfortunately, I would say maybe one of the ways that it happens is if it's kind of like there's a show like the old Brian Pillman tribute shows where WWE, WCW, and ECW all had talent because it was a benefit show. So maybe something like that. But I think right now, well, I'm gonna. In the words of Roddy Piper, when you think you have all the answers, I change up the questions. I'm gonna change the question up on you. AEW, like I said, has a pay-per-view this weekend. NXT also has a show the same day. There are rumors that the next all-women WWE pay-per-view, Evolution 2, is going to be the same day as AEW's big stadium show, All In. Do you think WWE deliberately does that to hinder AEW?
I don't know. I mean, I know probably it looks on the surface that they are. I don't know. I don't think. I guess if you're asking me, do I think Bruce Pritchard and Triple H and Michael Hayes are sitting in a room looking at AEW's calendar and saying, "Oh, let's throw something on this day to fuck with them." I don't think that.
Because I mean, it's not the first time it's happened, and I read something, a few months ago where AEW isn't announcing shows too far in advance now to keep WWE from counter programming.
But I mean, if you look at it, I guess if you look at it from one side, it's like, okay, well, these are two different products. It would be like
good thing.
It would almost be like if the NFL and the UFL, is that what it's called now?
Yeah.
Had games on the same day. It's they're in the same genre, but it's two different things. Or like you said, a John Wick movie opening up against a Marvel movie. Is Marvel trying to counter program and take viewers away from the John Wick film if they decide, oh, well, we're going to release our movie that weekend too? I feel like, and I guess, yeah, because it's, AEW is the underdog. I don't know what WWE gets from counter programming them, though.
I mean, let's go back in history. Crockett putting Clash of the Champions on the same day as WrestleMania 4, or didn't Vince launch Survivor Series to go up against Starrcade originally?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I would hope, and maybe this is my naivety and my want to see the good in people. I would hope that that WWE isn't purposely trying to sabotage AEW because one, they're not on the same level.
Right.
And two, hurting AEW is only going to hurt everybody that AEW employs. It's not like if AEW goes out of business, WWE is going to bring all those people over to their company.
Right.
So,
and Tony Khan will wake up a billionaire the next day still too. So it's not like they're going to put
billionaire
what
son.
I mean? What's that?
Billionaire son.
But yeah, that's what I don't. I know it on the surface. It looks sus. I get that, and part of me maybe is inclined to believe that there is something behind it. But then when I think it through, it's like, what would be the point? Why would they do that when they didn't do that with any other company? And I get that AEW is the most successful company, secondary wrestling company in the world, and probably in the history of wrestling at this point now. Maybe, I don't know. That may be a bold statement. But I just don't get, like you said, I would hope, again, like trying to see the best. And I don't know how many decisions WWE is making now are within the WWE umbrella versus externally with TKO and well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, because there's a whole board of people to answer to. I don't think that Triple H can just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, we're going to do a pay-per-view on July 12th and go up against AEW,"
Yeah.
without jumping through hoops and all that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't.
he's got to call the final boss and find out if he's
You're
going to be
right.
available to come in and ruin a storyline. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know. I guess that's my uh I'm running for politics, and that's going to be my, well, uh I'm unaware of anything. So no, I really, I
Depends what your
don't.
definition of is.
Yes. Um I I would hope not, but again, stranger things have happened, and like you said, I do think it's a different day and age though, with JCP and WWE or WWF back then, and how things went, and I I don't watch AEW. I do watch the highlights though. I keep up with it that way. I don't watch on. I don't have Max, so I don't stream it or anything like that. But I just certainly don't want it to go away either. So uh, as a bigger WWE fan than AEW fan, I still find the value of having that challenger brand or having that alternative. And it's nice to have an alternative for men and women who get released from either company to go and make either a comparable or the same, or in some cases more than what they were making, versus getting cut from WWE and then going to TNA and taking a 50 or 60% decrease in pay,
Mhm.
or having to go to the indie scene. So I'm glad that AEW is there and an alternative, and like you said, um, it would hurt the guys and the women more so than it hurts the cons, if or
Yeah.
conversely, if WWE were to go out of business, it would hurt the men and women there wrestling and doing the work behind the scenes than it would hurt
Hmm.
TKO. So I hope that is not the case, but I again wouldn't be surprised, because I know how it looks, and it
Yeah.
probably, there's probably smoke and fire and all, however that analogy goes, but I would hope.
Yeah. Well, do you at least watch Hey EW like I keep telling you to every week?
I don't watch it every week. I have watched it. I have watched some of them, but again, for me, I am very like, I have fallen into this TikTok trap of, if I'm not hooked in the first probably
Two
3 or 4
seconds for
seconds,
TikTok?
I'm scrolling on, and sometimes some of those videos, it takes forever to, and then sometimes you've got those creators out there that are just kind of purposely, I think, annoying, or purposely putting out misinformation, and that's where I was getting back with Hogan,
Boom.
saying those things. Yeah, are they doing those things to keep people engaged? That enrage bait, or whatever they call it now,
Mhm.
where they're posting false stuff just to get the response and get the views, if you will, and the comments, because that's what it's all fueled on, is people saying stupid shit, and then I click on it and
You,
respond to it, and then I'm going back to it. So
you know who I really hate that does stuff like that?
who?
KTLA, the independent news, because they'll put stuff on Instagram. It's like, such and such happens. Click story for full details. And it's like, why don't you give me the basics in your caption, and then I can decide to read it. Don't tease me to make me like this Hollywood star involved in car crash.
Yeah,
Tell me.
that's not just KTLA. That's
Uh,
become, even the
that's
local
everything.
stations around here in Southern
Yeah.
Illinois are, not every story is like that they do, but they are doing more, where on Facebook it's like a red box or a blue
Yeah.
box, and it has the caption and then a link to click on. But yeah, and people are commenting, and they're saying stuff. So I don't know why that trend is happening, but yeah, I've noticed
Clickbait.
it.
I mean, I guess that you got to get page views.
Yeah.
So, and if you give people the information that they need, they're just going to keep going. So yeah,
Well,
clickbait.
oh, go
Again,
ahead.
social media is terrible, and we need to get rid of it. Basically.
Well, as we start wrapping up this week's episode, we're both in our 50s. I don't know if I would have looked 20 years ahead when I was in my 30s, would I still be watching wrestling? I don't know what the answer would have been, but I find myself now in my 50s. I'm still watching. I don't see a time where I ever stop. like you said earlier, other responsibilities may pop up. We may have other things going on. Um, I mean, I still
Yeah.
buy the wrestling figures behind
Yeah.
me, and
Like,
I engage in those kinds of things. So I don't see a time where I ever stop. But do you anticipate 60, 70, 80-year-old Chad Smart still watching, whatever incarnation of pro wrestling is out there?
by that time, hopefully we'll have hologram wrestling to where you're like watching and it's like being there live. Um, I think the biggest difference right now, and we've mentioned this several times before on the show, is that you look back, let's say, WrestleMania 1 through 10. I can tell you the major storylines. I can tell you who fought on that. I can't tell you who fought on Backlash 2 weeks ago or on the last AEW pay-per-view. Even a show that I was at, I'm like, oh yeah, who fought there? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that comes with the difference of priorities and having a life, is that information is not absorbed as again, as kids, you bought the magazines, you watched the weekly show, you knew it was what you absorbed basically. And now it's just part of a daily routine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I said, I took up reading again this year. I have read more books in the last 2 months than I've read in the last 10 years. Wow. Don't ask me for details about the books. I can tell you bits and pieces, and I can give you an overview, but I can't give you a specific on a lot of stuff that I read. So it just doesn't sink in anymore. Maybe that's just old.
It could be part of that too. It is interesting as we get older and fandom and not just wrestling, but other aspects of life. But Chad, I thank you for being a part of this week's episode. Friends, I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you in the comments. Let us know, why are you still watching? Why are you listening to wrestling podcast and buying the figures if you do? And so what is it about wrestling in your adulthood? Because I think most of our listeners and watchers or our viewers, I should say, are adults. But what is it about the product that you keep coming back for? And how long have you been a fan? Let us know in the comments. You may win a prize for your efforts as well. So again, thank you for listening and or watching to this week's episode, and we will see you next time.